The Rebbe said Moshiach is coming ut, very soon. Can you explain where he is?
This is a very personal question. And when I say personal, I don't only mean individual. I mean that it touches us. It hurts. It's a painful question. It's a hard question. Because this is not philosophy, you understand? I don't need to explain it. This is what lies at the heart of every chassid, his connection to the Rebbe, and this, our belief in Emunah and Moshiach. Nobody, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when the whole passion about Moshiach became the dominant discussion in the Rebbe's talking, whenever that started, but particularly after the Sicha of Chav Chas Nissen, Chav Zayin Nissen, Tinasi, Tafshin and Alf, when all the Rebbe talked about was Moshiach, would have dreamt in their worst nightmare that in Tafshin Pei we would be asking that question. It's almost 30 years. So to ignore that, to make believe that that's not a legitimate question is simply disingenuous, it's dishonest, it's less than true. So you're putting me in the uncomfortable position of explaining what's going on. You know, there are some who dare suggest that the Rebbe tried, like many other Gedolei Yisrael tried. The Rebbe spoke about it in the Sikha of Pashas Kiseitze, Tovshin Memches, but he mentioned other Gedolei Yisrael tried to bring Mashiach. It's unacceptable to us that the Rebbe tried. And of course, the end of that sentence is tried and didn't succeed. The Rebbe tried, the Rebbe is trying, and he will succeed. There's no question about it. And of course, you say, so what's the difference? What's the difference between the Gedolei Yisrael of yesteryear and the Rebbe? So this, like I said, this is a very personal thing. I mean, anybody who knows anything about the Rebbe knows one thing. The Rebbe is not into esoterica. The Rebbe is really not into Elam Yisrael Yoinim. In other words, nobody can say that the Rebbe is going to be satisfied with the Mashiach of the Likutei Torah, like the story of the Rebbe Maharash and the Tzemach Tzedek. It's just not the Rebbe. It's Elam Hazeh HaGashmi VaChumri and HaMaisa Hu HaIkir and Deir HaShvi and B'mamshich D'Shechina L'mata Ba'oretz. So I think the first part of the answer to the question is we have to remove from our Yetzer Hara, or remove the Yetzer Hara from us that allows us to think that maybe what the Rebbe started is not continuing. It's just completely out of character. If the Rebbe said he's going to bring Mashiach, he will. And in this world, physically. And there are a number of things that are distinctive to the Rebbe's approach. And the most important is that, you know, the whole idea of Chabad, right? The Rebbe spoke about this in the very first Fabrengen, that there was a machlokes amongst the tzaddikim of Chasidus about how to give Chasidus to Chasidim, and the derech of tzaddikim Poilin, the dominant opinion of most great Hasidic masters was v'tzadik b'emunasa yichya al tikra yichya el yachaya, that the tzaddik carries the whole load by himself. All the Chassid has is the emunah in the Rebbe and the tzaddik, and the Rebbe carries the load. The tzaddik has to do all of the work. The Alter Rebbe went away from this, and of course he was criticized because of this, and to some degree he separated himself from the mainstream of Hasidus as a consequence that v'tzadik goes on every single person, not on the Rebbe. B'emunasa yichya means you have to arouse your own emunah, and that the Chassid Rebbe relationship is not about the Rebbe giving you emunah, it's about the Rebbe giving you instructions about how you can have emunah on your own. And in the very first Fabrengen, Yud Shvat, Tov Yud Aleph, right after the Maimer, the Rebbe said that in Chabad we didn't believe in Atikri Yechya Eliyachaya. Everyone has their own job. Or in other words, if you want to understand, at least in part, what separates the Shturim of Mashiach of the Rebbe from the Gedolei Yisrael before is that the Rebbe's effort to bring in Mashiach is through us, through every single Jew, in particular Hasidim and Shluchim. And that's not going to fail. You know, a tzaddik, a God will be Yisrael. The Rebbe's whole idea is that every single Yid is a shutef in this effort, obviously through spreading Yiddishkeit and through spreading Chasidus, and very specifically, Mifza Mashiach And Mifta Mashiach, I think, really comes down to every one of us wanting Mashiach. And, as the Rebbe said many times, not wanting Mashiach because he wants us to want Mashiach, but wanting Mashiach because we want Mashiach. And nobody can possibly want Mashiach if you don't know what it is, which is why you have to learn. And this is part of what I think the difference is. The Rebbe v'durchfiren. The Rebbe is going to carry through. It's going to happen. He's going to bring Mashiach Tzedkenu. But the Rebbe's efforts involve every single person. Like he said, Chav Ches Nissen, we're not the Rebbe. We have a small little piece of the puzzle that we have to bring, but our piece we must bring. And our piece is spreading Yiddishkeit, spreading Hasidus, and understanding Mashiach, desiring Mashiach, and make everybody around us appreciate why we need Mashiach. Not only because of tzaddis, not only because of hardships, but because ben shegolam al shulchan aviv, when a son is missing from his father's table, it's painful for the father and painful for the son. It's unnatural. That's why we want Mashiach. We want Mashiach because this world was created for Gilui Elokus. And Gilui Elokus is about the Jewish people, like it says in the Maimer Vata Tetzaveh. Gilui Elokus neger le'etzem mitziyusei, ad, that the lack of Gilui Elokus causes kasas lamoyer. This is an instruction from the Rebbe to each one of us. We have an obligation to appreciate what Mashiach means in a way that makes us need him, want him, desire him. And it says in Sfarim, the Rebbe spoke about this as well, that when we want Mashiach, we'll bring Mashiach. And one other thing in answering the question is an idea that the Rebbe spoke about. And I'm going to mention several points. The first is the Yalkut Shemoni. Right, in 1991, the Rebbe spoke about a Yalkut Shemoni, that the Yalkut Shemoni talks about things happening in the world, and Yidden being very bewildered and being very afraid. And Hashem says to the Jewish people, Al tisro, don't be afraid, Kol ma sha'asisi, lo yasisi eli b'shvilchem, everything I'm doing for you. And of course that Medrash finishes with the words, Anovim higia zman gu'alaschem, humble ones, the time of your redemption has arrived. And this Medrash, by the way, was found by a Chassid, and he hung it up on the wall. I think it was Aaron Klein, Olav Hashalom. And the Rebbe quoted the Medrash in Fabrengens, and then he repeated it many times. And when the Rebbe quoted, the Rebbe added the next two lines of the Medrash in Yalkut Shemoni, which he did not include in his, what he hung up on the wall. That it says, Shana Shamelech HaMashiach Ba'abay, in the year in which Mashiach comes, Mashiach aim with Agag Beis HaMikdash, Mashiach gets up on the roof of the Beis HaMikdash, and he says, enough Megiyaz Mangolach. And the Rebbe spoke all kinds of Ramazim about this, including that Gagim Leiniskachu, that this goes on Beis Rabbeinu Shebabavel. You can read the Siches, I remember the Siches, about the idea that Mashiach is coming. In that Yalkut Shemoni, the Rebbe brought out the point that things happening in the world that look confusing and befuddling and even frightening are Hashem saying to the Jewish people, it's all for you, Mashiach's coming. The second point I want to mention in light of this is what the Rebbe spoke in the very beginning of the Fabrengen of Tazir Metzeda in Nun Aleph, as it's edited, where the Rebbe said that there's two levels. One level is called Niflois Arenu, and the second level is called Arenu Niflois. Niflois Arenu means wonders that Hashem shows. Arenu Niflois means that he shows wonders. What's the difference if you put Niflois before Arenu or you put Arenu before Niflois? So the Rebbe explained that some things happen in the world that are self-observable. They happen and you see God. Other things happen in the world and they have to be shown to you. So Niflois Arenu means there are wonders. You don't see them unless someone points them out. Arenu Niflois are wonders that are so self-evident, it's as if Hashem is showing them to you himself. And the Rebbe said, before Mashiach there are many ploy, many wonders. The wonders that happen before Mashiach, someone has to point out. That's called Niflois Arenu. The wonders that are of the Hisgalus of Mashiach itself are Arenu Niflois, they're self-evident, and again, in the wording of the Rebbe, Hashem himself is showing. And what the Rebbe was indicating is, at that time, 30 years ago, we saw many miracles. Incredible miracles. And of course, the greatest of those was the collapse of the Soviet Union, which we witnessed. It's one of the greatest miracles in the history of mankind. It happened during our lifetime. And no one thinks twice about it because it happened so benignly, so innocuously, so by mistake. You could miss it. If the Rebbe would not show us these miracles, we would say Mikra Nikris. We wouldn't even see how extraordinary it is. There's a Sikha told this Tafshin Nun. It's special for me because it happens to be the anniversary of my Ufruf. I got married that week. Where the Rebbe said we see changes in half a world. And he mentioned India and China and Russia by name. That in population, it's half the world's population. And the Rebbe said all three of these massive countries are experiencing revolution, and all of them are going in the direction of tzedek v'yesha. And the Rebbe says, do not think that this is coincidental. This is poshit in yon simanim of Moshiach. When goyim lahadol are advocating fairness, righteousness, individual rights, personal rights, v'chuli, for all the citizens across the world, that's poshit from the simanim of Moshiach. And the Rebbe said, we see these simanim all over the place, but we don't pay attention. And the Rebbe said, he's showing them to us. And there's so many talks that Sichav told us is only one. And there are numerous other talks where the Rebbe pointed to things happening in the world and said, you're seeing the Sichav Shoift Mishpatim, Nun Beis Mishpatim, 1 month before the stroke. One of the most important Sichas, where the Rebbe talked about the collapse of the Soviet Union and the disarmament. What I want to say is that in the last 25, 30 years, we've experienced the same kind of miracles going forward. Many things have happened in the world that are extraordinary. But we don't see them because the Rebbe is not sitting at the table and saying, look. But they're happening. And in the words of the Rebbe, you open your eyes, you see. In other words, in the last 30 years, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of steps back. Certainly, in our world, it's hard, it's difficult, it's a big test. Our world, I mean the world of Anash, Chassidim, Lubavitchers, and Bechlal Yidden. But if you step back and look at it, the things that Rebbe pointed to us 30 years ago did not only happen then, they're happening. And just to give one example, in Tafshin and Alf, the Rebbe spoke about Israel as being the safest place in the world. 38 Scuds landed in Eretz Yisrael from Iraq. There were hundreds of miles. They flew through 100 miles of airspace. And there was very little, there was no loss of life. There was some damage to property, no loss of life. And we all celebrated the miracle. Why? Because the Rebbe showed it to us. A few summers ago, 3,000 rockets. 3,000 rockets were not sent from Iraq. They were sent from Gaza. And there was almost no loss of life, or there was no loss of life. Iron Dome, this is Nisim Gluyim She'ein Kamoyim. These are miracles which are unprecedented. In the newspapers, the Muslims, the Arabs were quoted as saying their God is redirecting the missiles. This is something that happened a few summers ago. It didn't happen 25 years ago, and it didn't happen 1,000 years ago. It happened very recently. But because the Rebbe is not sitting and pointing them out, we fail to see them. And I think if we refine our vision, we'll see Mashiach all around us. I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying it's simple, and I'm not saying it's clear, and I'm certainly not saying it's pleasant. But Ot Tapkut Mashiach is not something that was said 30 years ago, and since then it's gone stale. Ot Kunt Mashiach was said 30 years ago, and every day it's more and stronger. Like the Rebbe said, Bechlal about the Rebbe, Yedid Tag, Ve'eter Lebedikir, Umer Aktiv, you see the Rebbe in the world more than ever. The Rebbe's influence on the world is more today than it ever was. There's more people coming to the Rebbe now than ever came. That's not a miracle. It's not Ot Kunt Mashiach. So, to repeat from the beginning, to be insensitive to this question is false and cruel. It's a real question. It's a very frustrating question, very painful question. Ad Mosai. And Ad Mosai, the Rebbe said in one of his years that if you polish the buttons too much, you ruin the finish. And I'm not the person, I don't think anybody's the person to speak with certitude, with certainty about these issues. But these points, number one, that the Rebbe's idea that we're going to bring Mashiach is collective. It's the whole Klal Yisrael. Every Yid has to learn about Mashiach and think about Mashiach and understand what Mashiach is, and he has to desire Mashiach. And number two, there are many, many indicators that the things that Rebbe spoke about are continuing. And may God Almighty bless that before this film is aired, we will have this Galus of Melech HaMashiach, and it'll become a redundancy. And I just want to say that one of the key aspects of this entire process is Simcha. B'chlal, a Yid has to be Sameach. A Chosid has to be Sameach as well. It's an Avodah. And the Rebbe spoke in Memches, Pashas Kiseitze, that the Rebbe challenged us. The Rebbe says so many people have tried to bring Moshiach in the past, and he mentioned the Beis Dilainu and the Chayze, Milublin. The one thing that's never been tried is to bring Moshiach through Simcha. And I think Simcha means Betachem. And the Rebbe almost said, B'chanuni zavazais, try, see. It's axiomatic to Hasidim, you have to serve Hashem b'tech Simcha. And so the Rebbe is to help, and it should be easy to be b'Simcha. And we should say the Gula Shleima now, Mamish.